ship came with a bonus, and now she refuses to let him go. The sun sliced through the desert sky like a blazing blade, casting thin shadows over the metal carcasses scattered among the reddish dunes. The abandoned ship auction happened just once a year, right on the forgotten border between Nevada and Arizona. A graveyard of fallen titans, cargo freighters, military patrol vessels, colonial pods, even the remains of unclaimed alien probes. Most were buried in sand, rusted, useless. Ethan Carter was the kind of man who showed up at every auction, but never bought a thing. A former mechanic for the Earth Fleet, veteran of the Orion Line War, now just another survivor trying to piece his life together on the fringes of civilization. He lived in a makeshift workshop near a decommissioned gas station, slept in a shipping container, and drank more coffee than any liver should be able to handle. That day, he only came to the auction to watch. Picking through scrap was almost therapeutic, until his eyes locked on the 227B. The ship looked dead. A mid-sized freighter, its hull scorched by plasma and pocked with holes like it had taken orbital fire. The windows were shattered, and the front fuselage crushed in, like it had fallen from high altitude. But there was something about it. A whisper. Something invisible, like the hull itself, was breathing. Ethan felt it in his spine, a vibration, almost like someone was watching him from inside the ship. "That thing's cursed," muttered an old man with a white beard beside him. "They say no one can open the cockpit, and those who try disappear." Ethan gave a crooked smile. How much does fear go for these days? When the auctioneer reached 227B, he barely bothered with the intro. "This one, well, you can see. It's sealed. Biometric lock failed. Black box removed. Last owner unknown. Whoever wants it, take it." Silence. Ethan raised his hand. $100.20. People laughed. The auctioneer hesitated. "Sold." Ethan signed the paperwork, took the general access key, and headed for the freighter's boarding ramp. The sun was already dipping low as he stepped through the hatch and into the ship. Inside, it was a metal oven. Emergency lights still blinked red, casting faint flashes on the corroded walls. Every footstep echoed like a muffled whisper, and the air smelled of rust, old oil, and something floral. Sweet, feminine, almost unreal. "What the hell?" he muttered, walking down the narrow corridors. When he reached the cockpit, the door was sealed, not locked with a code or key card, welded shut from the inside. Ethan frowned. Anyone in there? Nothing. He pulled out his portable torch, carefully cut through the seal, metal hissing under the heat, smoke curling upward. The door gave with a dull crack and slowly swung open. Silence. The cockpit was dark, except for the faint glow of a cracked console. In the corner stood a cryopod covered in dust. It didn't seem powered, but it was intact. And then he saw it. Inside the pod was a woman, or something like one. Her skin was a deep, shifting blue, like liquid gemstone under the light. Long black hair flowed over her shoulders, glassy and almost unreal in its shimmer. She wore something light, translucent, revealing more than it hid. But what caught his eye most were the curved horns rising from her forehead, like a crown made of white bone. She didn't move. "No way," Ethan whispered, stepping closer. The pod clicked. Power surged on. A high-pitched tone filled the air as the lid slowly opened with a hiss of cold mist. Ethan took 2 steps back, hand on the makeshift holster strapped to his waist. Her eyes opened. Violet. Intense. Not human. "Finally," she said, her accent unplaceable, her voice raspy like it hadn't been used in years. "My husband has arrived." Ethan stood frozen. She rose slowly, bracing herself on her knees. She looked around, saw the orange desert sky through the cracked windows, and drew in a deep breath as if feeling the heat for the first time. "This planet is harsh, but you bought me." "So," she tilted her head, eyes locked on his, "I'm yours now." "What do you mean?" Ethan muttered. I only bought the ship." She stood up fully. She was tall, graceful, her movements slow and elegant. Her bare feet touched the metal floor as she stepped closer, until she was less than a meter away from him. "In my culture, the one who takes command of the ship takes the bond as well. It's the last sacred contract. This some kind of alien ritual." She reached out and touched his chest lightly with her fingertips. "You freed me. Now we are bound." Ethan took a deep breath. The air felt heavier now. The ship more alive, as if her mere presence had reawakened it. "What's your name?" She smiled faintly, an expression that was both sorrowful and powerful. "In your language, you would call me Zaria." Outside, the desert wind howled through the metal husks. A lone coyote cried in the distance. And Ethan Carter, who thought he had bought nothing more than a pile of useless scrap, realized he brought home something far stranger and far more alive than he could have ever imagined. Zaria slept wrapped in a thermal blanket, lying on the floor of Ethan's makeshift workshop, her head resting on his old military coat, the closest thing to a pillow he had. Ethan, meanwhile, had been awake for hours, sitting on a metal stool, staring at the sleeping blue-skinned woman who claimed to be his wife by interplanetary right. Outside, the desert remained silent, save for the low hum of the solar generator and the occasional creak of metal plates cooling under the night sky. Ethan rubbed his face. He hadn't slept. How could he? Zaria, hair black as a starless night, skin blue like living sapphire, and eyes that looked through him, like they could see his most embarrassing memories. "This isn't right," he whispered to himself. "None of this makes sense." But the ship's sensors confirmed it. She was alive. Half the cryo systems were fried, yet she had survived. And more than that, her biology didn't match any known species in the Earth Alliance database. He tried contacting them, direct uplink to the data hub in Houston. No response. Desert signal was trash, and it wasn't like he still had his old military clearance anyway. The next day, she woke up. First, her fingers moved, then her feet, and, as if she were already perfectly adapted to the gravity, the atmosphere, and the world that wasn't hers, she stood up with a calm elegance that completely contradicted the situation. Ethan had a mug of coffee in one hand and a gun in the other. He hated that, but he couldn't pretend none of it had happened. "Good morning," she said, her voice still raspy, slightly slurred from cryo sleep. Good morning." She walked barefoot across the cement floor, taking in the workshop, dismantled engines, toolboxes, scattered cables, the smell of grease and hot metal. "You live here?" she asked. "It's what's left of a life, let's say." She approached the workbench where an old photo sat. Ethan, standing next to a human woman, red-haired, smiling. She wore no ring, but the way she looked at Ethan in the picture said everything. Zaria didn't touch the frame, but she stared at it far too long. "She was yours." She was. Ethan took a bitter sip of his coffee. "Not anymore." Silence. "Your people," she said, changing the subject with an almost cruel ease, "are louder than mine. Even in silence, there is noise. It's like everything here is trying to be noticed." Ethan leaned against the wall, watching how she moved, how she touched objects like they were sacred. She wasn't afraid of anything here, and didn't seem the least bit worried about being light years from home. "Where's your home?" he asked. "It's no longer there," she said, like it was a joke, but her eyes didn't smile. "My planet collapsed. No more atmosphere, no oceans, just dust. What was left of our people was stored in capsules like mine, placed inside living ships scattered across space, waiting for a connection. A rescue. You're telling me I bought a funeral capsule? You bought a promise, an ancient tradition. Whoever inherits the ship inherits the guardian inside it. And in my case, the bond is marital." "Marital?" Ethan nearly dropped his coffee. I'm not married to you." "You are," she said, stepping closer, eyes locked onto his. "At least in the eyes of my people. And since my people no longer exist, your culture is all that remains. And I'm open to learning." Ethan laughed, nervous, humorless. "This just keeps getting weirder. You don't want me? I don't even know who you are." Zaria seemed to consider that for a moment. "In my culture, the bond didn't depend on love. Love was the result of time spent together, not a requirement. Acceptance was the first step, and I accept you." Ethan turned away, taking a deep breath. "You talk like this is simple, like it's just merging two systems." She responded softly, almost a whisper. "That's exactly what it is." Then, something outside exploded. A flash, a sharp crack, a blast of sand. Ethan ran to the workshop door and saw one of the external sensors burning out, sparks shooting into the dry air. Nothing he couldn't fix, but strange. Very strange. Zaria appeared beside him seconds later, eyes fixed on the horizon. She didn't look surprised or afraid, just alert. "They came faster than I expected," she said. Ethan turned to her slowly. "Who?" "The ones who were looking for me. The ones who wanted to prevent me from being found. If I'm active, they must be too." "Who are they, Zaria?" She looked deep into his eyes. "Others like me, but not all with good intentions." The desert was no longer quiet. The next night, Ethan heard a low hum coming from the sky. It wasn't a plane, helicopter, or regular drone. He knew those sounds. This one was deeper, heavier, like the growl of a sleeping beast gliding through the dark above. He ran outside the workshop, but saw only shadows. Nothing on the radar, nothing in the heat spectrum, just the sound and the chill in his bones. Zaria was already up. She wore a makeshift robe crafted from parachute fabric and cut-up belts. Even in that improvised outfit, she looked like royalty. She stood in silence, eyes locked on the stars. "They're scanning," she murmured. "Looking for me. Who exactly are they, Zaria?" "The children of perdition," she said, still watching the sky. "A clan that strayed from our ancient ways. They hunt the last of us to silence us, to ensure no one inherits what remains of our civilization. You said they were like you, biologically, but spiritually, they've lost their way. They don't want fusion with other peoples. They want domination. They want our lineage erased from history. And now they know you've been activated." She nodded. "And now they know about you too." Ethan went quiet. The wind swept sand across the ground of metal and stone. And there, surrounded by screws and broken engines, he realized this wasn't just about alien curiosity anymore. This was a hunt, and he was in the middle of it. The next morning, Ethan tried to do what he always did when he felt threatened: work. He fiddled with an old generator, reconnecting wires, testing voltage. But he couldn't stop glancing at the sky. Zaria approached slowly. She carried a metallic box he hadn't seen before, something pulled from deep within the 227B. She placed it on the workbench and opened it. Inside was a pulsing crystal, blue and violet, encased in a structure that looked like sculpted bone. "This is a transmission bond," she said, "an artifact that allows me to share my life signal with another being. If I bind it to you, our energy frequencies will merge. They won't be able to track me without tracking you too." Ethan dropped the wires. "Wait, you want to hide inside me?" "Not physically," she replied calmly. "Energetically. Your human signature is imperfect to them. It scrambles their sensors. But the bond is real, and it cannot be undone." Ethan took a deep breath. This was the kind of decision that changed everything. A point of no return. A mark that would never fade. "What if I say no? Then I'll run alone," she said, without drama. "But know this, the moment I left that capsule, you stopped being neutral. You freed me. That makes you part of this, whether you want to be or not." Silence. Ethan looked at his grease-covered hands. They'd built so much, lost even more. But for the first time in years, there was someone who needed him. Not for money, not for glory, but for survival. "Show me how it works." Zaria smiled. For the first time, it was real. Something in her chest seemed to release, like he'd passed an invisible test and had finally been accepted. She took the crystal, touched it to the base of his neck, and whispered words in her language. A string of almost musical sounds, filled with deep tones and stretched vowels. Ethan felt a wave of heat rise through his spine. It didn't hurt, but it tingled, like a new memory being stitched into his soul. When she finished, she looked into his eyes. "We are now one, in the eyes of the stars." That afternoon, the external sensors picked up movement 3 kilometers out. Something was coming fast, but invisible to standard radar. "They're coming," Zaria said. "Should I run?" Ethan looked around. At the desert, at the old ship, at the toolbox, at the tattered American flag flapping in the wind. Then he looked at her. "If I'm going to die," he said, "I'm not doing it alone, or hiding." Zaria stepped closer. Her eyes shimmered under the sun. She pressed her forehead to his, and for a moment, there was no war. No clans, just warmth, breathing, and a silent bond that needed no more words. Ethan walked into the workshop, grabbed an old weapon, a modified plasma rifle, and activated the dispersion field. He set up traps around the place like he used to in the old days. "They want a prisoner," he said. "They'll find a fortress. Zaria only nodded, but something still bothered him. Why were you on that ship, Zaria? Who put you there? She hesitated. My father hid me. I was the last of our royal line, an heir. He believed that if I could bond with another people, a new hope would rise. A new kind of people, a fusion of worlds. And he just left you drifting out there. He entrusted me to time. Ethan slung the rifle over his shoulder. Well, then time better know how to shoot. Lights appeared in the distance. 3 shimmering points in the sky, descending in a triangular formation. They didn't shine like human ships. These were angular, black shapes with liquid-like contours and silent motion. They're here. Zaria raised her hand, and the crystal around her neck began to glow. Ethan cocked the rifle. In that moment, there was no more doubt. Everything had changed. The old ship wasn't just junk. Zaria wasn't just some alien. And Ethan Carter was no longer just an ordinary man. The sun began to sink behind the dry Arizona mountains, painting the sky in shades of red and purple. Ethan's heart pounded, adrenaline surging through his veins as he watched the 3 dark shapes on the horizon, descending slowly, a threatening presence in the vast, arid emptiness. Zaria stood at his side, silent, her blue skin reflecting the dying light of day. Her violet eyes gleamed with a mix of determination and exhaustion. The crystal on her neck pulsed with a cold light, steady like the heartbeat of an alien hope still alive. They're here, Zaria said, her voice low and steady. They came for me. Ethan adjusted the plasma rifle in his hands, trying to steady his breathing. What if you don't go with them? He asked, not looking at her. She turned to him, gaze intense, almost piercing. Then they'll come for you too, she said. Her voice was deep, heavy with warning and certainty. The silence that followed felt crushing. Ethan knew now, this wasn't just an accidental purchase of an old ship. This was a dive into a world of alien intrigue and danger. The black dots in the sky accelerated, slicing through the hot desert air like sharp blades. The old 227, B freighter he had bought, rusted and forgotten, now felt like the last fortress standing against a threat he barely understood. Prepare defenses, Ethan ordered, his voice steady despite the fear tightening in his chest. He activated the makeshift traps around the workshop, exposed wires, jury-rigged force field generators, anything that could slow the invaders down. Meanwhile, Zaria began chanting ancient words in her native tongue, a sequence of strange, flowing sounds that made the air around her vibrate with invisible energy. The first attack came with a silent boom. Bursts of black light tore through the sky, and shadows emerged from the darkness. Angular forms, moving at impossible speeds, trying to reach the ship and Ethan. The battle wasn't just an exchange of fire. It was a clash of forces, technology, energy, and sheer will colliding in the burning desert. Amid the chaos, Ethan realized something that froze his blood. Zaria wasn't just a fugitive. She was the key to something far greater, to the survival of a nearly extinct civilization, to a future that now depended on her. What do I do? Ethan shouted, dodging a blast that exploded near his feet. How do I protect you? She smiled, a bittersweet expression filled with hope and sorrow that somehow lit up the darkness. Trust me. Seconds later, a burst of blue light surged from her hands. A glowing barrier erupted around them, tearing down the black machines that advanced, their forms dissolving into sparks and smoke. But the price was steep. A shot struck Ethan's leg, and he collapsed to the ground, pain searing like fire through his muscles. Zaria rushed to him, gripping his hand tightly. You're with me, she said, voice strong despite the fear. Always, he replied, feeling the warmth of their unexpected bond. Then, from the sky, a figure descended, imposing and regal. A woman with silver skin and golden eyes that gleamed with command and power. She was the leader of the hunters, the enemy that had come for Zaria. Zaria, her voice boomed across the desert like thunder, return now. But Zaria shook her head, unwavering. Not until he's safe. With a single motion, the commander activated a force field, a dome of energy that sealed the entire desert in a shimmering bubble, isolating Ethan, Zaria, and the advancing threat. No more choices, Ethan said, staring at the shimmering prison around them. She smiled, a mix of defiance and calm. together. As the field closed in, Ethan held Zaria's hand and knew this fight would change both their lives forever. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, subscribe to the channel. There's plenty more where this came from. The force field still pulsed softly around the makeshift workshop, casting bluish tones against the metal walls and the orange dunes stretching beyond the cracked windows. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. But inside, the air was heavy, filled with the tense quiet that only comes after a storm. Ethan Carter sat on a makeshift bench, his right leg propped up on a stack of crates. The wound from the battle throbbed in uneven waves, a cruel reminder of the violence they had faced. His breathing was shallow, ragged, marked by the pain of the bullet lodged near his muscle. Across from him, Zaria moved between scattered tools and half-working communication equipment, adjusting devices that looked like a mix of ancient tech and scavenged parts. She was focused, but the tension etched across her blue face betrayed the weight of the responsibility she now carried. "You should have let me run," Ethan said, his voice hoarse, barely a whisper. "You didn't have to risk everything for me." She stopped what she was doing and turned slowly. Her violet eyes met his, steady and filled with a quiet, surprising strength. "You're not someone I chose to protect by accident," she said, with a calmness that barely concealed the storm underneath. "You're part of me now. Our bond is more than a contract, Ethan." He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of those words. It wasn't just the wound in his leg that ached. It was the invisible tether between them, turning every decision into a shared burden, a vow that couldn't be undone. The silence that followed was shattered by a distant sound, the uneven growl of a vehicle approaching. Both of them stiffened, bodies tense. "They haven't given up," Zaria said, scanning the horizon with sharp, focused eyes. Ethan tried to stand, but pain shot through his leg and he staggered, needing to steady himself on the bench. "I'll handle it," she said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. He knew that tone, that urgency that allowed no hesitation. Before he could protest, Zaria was already at the door, opening the metal frame with a swift, fluid motion. Outside, a lone human figure emerged. Weathered clothes, a face carved by sun and sand, and a worn-out backpack slung over one shoulder. The man's eyes were cautious, but there was a flicker of hope. "Are you Ethan Carter?" The voice was deep and direct. "Depends who's asking," Ethan answered, steadying his voice despite the pain. The stranger stepped inside, eyes moving over the abandoned ship and then landing on Zaria, who stood beside Ethan with a graceful, unmistakably alien posture. "I was sent with information," he began, hesitating just a moment. "The government knows about her, knows what she is. We're interested in helping." Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and suspicion. Help at last, or just the next trap? Zaria studied the man, her eyes gleaming with both curiosity and caution. "Do you trust me?" she asked Ethan, her voice soft but steady. He looked at the plasma rifle resting beside him, at the fresh scars on his body, and finally, at her. "Trust is a tough word around here," he said, offering a tired smile. "But maybe we don't have much of a choice." The following days were a blur of tension and uneasy cooperation. The man, who introduced himself as Marcus, brought fragments of intel about the ones hunting Zaria, a fanatical group known as the Children of Perdition, determined to wipe out any remnants of her royal bloodline. According to Marcus, Earth's government was beginning to realize this wasn't just a story about a lost alien. It was a conflict that could threaten the balance between worlds. Despite his injury and doubt, Ethan found himself drawn deeper into the effort. He helped Zaria repair the 227B, while Marcus worked on strategies to strengthen the workshop's defenses and maintain the force field perimeter. But the nights were the worst. The pain in Ethan's leg kept him awake, and the images of battle haunted him. The black machines, the screaming plasma, the blue light exploding from Zaria's hands as she shielded him, as if their bond was the last barrier between life and extinction. And then, there was the tension building between them. What had started as a strange and sudden connection was evolving into something more complicated. Fear, duty, longing, and doubt. In one rare moment of quiet, Ethan approached her. She was standing beneath the open sky, staring up at the first stars blooming over the desert horizon. "Do you miss your world?" he asked softly, his voice nearly hesitant. Zaria turned slowly, her eyes reflecting the endless cosmos she had left behind. "I do," she replied, her voice laced with a sorrow that seemed to echo across time and space. "But what I feel more is the urgency to protect what remains of my people. And now, to protect you." He smiled, even through the pain. "I never thought I'd have someone to protect. Not after everything I've lost." "You're not alone anymore," she said, reaching for his hand. "Not you and not this land." The desert seemed quieter in that moment, but they both knew the storm was far from over. They were marked by all of it, the battle, the bond, the choices they would still have to make. And despite Ethan's fragile humanity and Zaria's alien origin, something new had begun to form between them, not just forged in survival, but in hope. The desert hung in suspension, caught between silence and the blistering heat of late afternoon. The sun dipped low, casting orange hues across the sky and turning the sand into a golden sea. Inside the makeshift workshop, the soft clink of tools echoed against metal. The light tap of a wrench, the low hum of a generator, the quiet jingle of scattered parts. Ethan Carter, his hands stained with grease and breath still uneven from his healing wound, worked in deep focus, trying to restore the control panel of the old 227B freighter. Zaria stood beside him, a blue silhouette in the golden light, moving with a graceful precision, adjusting cables, testing power flows, inspecting each component that might give them an edge. Her sapphire skin glowed softly in the dying light. Her dark hair fell like a curtain over her shoulders, and the crown of horns atop her head cast delicate shadows on the wall. The energy bond they shared pulsed faintly, syncing their heartbeats and emotions in a quiet, invisible rhythm. "Do you think this will work?" Ethan asked, pausing to wipe sweat from his brow. "More than that," Zaria replied. Her voice was calm, but carried a strength that cut through the dryness of the desert. "This ship will become the symbol of our resistance, a beacon for those who still believe." Ethan smiled, tired but genuine. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. As the days passed, his physical wounds slowly began to heal, but the emotional ones, the spiritual ones, still needed time, still needed care. Yet in that rough little space, between metal panels and tangled circuits, the humanity of Ethan and the alien soul of Zaria began to intertwine in ways neither had expected. They learned to read the subtle cues, a glance, a breath, the comfort of silence that said more than words. Ethan began sharing stories about Earth, old battles, buried fears, and forgotten dreams. Zaria spoke of her people, of a lost glory, ancient traditions, and the burden of being the last of a nearly extinct line. The nights brought an unexpected chill. Sitting near a makeshift fire, they exchanged confidences, quiet fears, and plans for a future they still hoped could exist. The crystal that hung from Zaria's neck glowed brighter with each passing night, as if it pulsed in rhythm with the depth of their growing connection. One evening, beneath a sky filled with stars that seemed like silent witnesses, Zaria approached Ethan, holding a small metallic box etched with symbols that shimmered faintly in the firelight. "This is for you," she said, offering the box. Ethan opened it carefully and found a ring inside, made from a cold, black metal, engraved with glyphs that seemed to pulse gently, almost alive. "What is it?" he asked, eyes meeting hers. "A symbol of my people," she said. "It's given to those who make a pact of protection and loyalty, a commitment that goes beyond time and distance, a bond not just between two beings, but between the essence of their worlds." Ethan felt a surge of emotion rise in his chest, forcing him to swallow hard. He looked into her eyes and recognized the depth of her gesture. It wasn't just a gift, it was a promise. A silent pact between two beings who, against all odds, had found something greater than themselves in each other. "I accept," he said, sliding the ring onto his finger. "Let this promise guide us." From that moment on, the makeshift workshop was no longer just a hideout. It became a sanctuary, a place where hope was reborn with every repaired circuit Every plan laid out to face the enemy, still lurking in the desert shadows. But the danger hadn't passed. Signs of enemy movement were detected often in the surrounding area. Every strange noise kept them alert, ready to defend not just themselves, but the fragile future they were trying to build. Despite his injuries, Ethan trained with Zaria, learning defense techniques, trying to mimic the speed and reflexes she displayed so effortlessly. She, in turn, tried to understand Ethan's world, learning his limits, his strengths, his courage, and his vulnerability. In the midst of it all, something between them shifted. Fear gave way to growing trust. Suspicion faded into true partnership. They were no longer just survivors. They were allies, accomplices, and maybe, slowly, something more. On one especially quiet night, Ethan watched Zaria staring up at the sky, her hands gently holding the glowing crystal at her chest. "Do you think we'll win?" he asked, stepping closer. She turned toward him, her deep blue eyes shining in the starlight. "I don't know what the future holds," she said, "but I believe that as long as we're together, we have a chance. And that's enough." He smiled, feeling the warmth of her presence like a shield against everything unknown that surrounded them. Their connection went beyond logic and reason. It was a delicate dance between two worlds, bound by the need to survive, to protect, and maybe even to love. And so, in the unforgiving desert, Ethan and Zaria weren't just rebuilding a ship. They were shaping a future. An uncertain one, yes, but a future where the impossible might still become real. The desert was no longer the same. The once clear sky had darkened, heavy storm clouds rolling in across the horizon like a warning. The wind howled through the rocks, stirring the sand into wild, twisting spirals like restless spirits. The sun vanished behind a blood-red veil, and Ethan could feel the weight of the night pressing in, a cold certainty that everything was about to change. The small workshop, pieced together from scrap and salvaged metal, shook under the impact of attacks that had been raging for hours. The machines of the Children of Perdition came like shadows, dark and relentless, slicing through the air with metallic shrieks and searing bolts of energy. The old 227 B freighter was battered, covered in sparks and scorch marks, its hull wounded like the very heart of their resistance. Zaria stood in the center of the storm, a figure of light and shadow, her sapphire skin glowing as she channeled the energy of the crystal hanging at her neck. Her hands moved in elegant, deliberate patterns, releasing powerful blasts of blue energy that tore through enemy machines while conjuring near-invisible shields to protect them from the incoming fire. Ethan, still feeling the burning pain of the bullet lodged in his leg, fought with relentless focus. His plasma rifle roared with heat, his aim steady despite the agony and exhaustion. Every time his eyes found Zaria, he felt stronger, as if their bond was the very fuel keeping him going. But the battle was far from over. Among the attackers, a tall, imposing figure emerged, cloaked in gleaming black armor, advancing towards Zaria with a massive energy blade glowing with deadly light. "No!" Ethan shouted, firing a burst just in time to knock the strike off course by mere inches. But the next strike was brutal. The blade sliced across Zaria's shoulder, tearing from her a sharp cry that seemed to echo through the silent desert. Blue blood spilled, and she dropped to her knees, her strength visibly fading. Ethan rushed to her side, holding her gently, his face tense with the pain he saw in her violet eyes. "You need to get up," he urged, voice steady but desperate. "You can't give up now." She smiled, despite the wound and exhaustion. "With you by my side, I fear nothing," she replied, squeezing his hand. The sandstorm intensified, engulfing everything in a fierce, orange veil that reduced visibility to almost nothing. The sounds of battle, gunfire, explosions, screams, were muffled by the thick curtain of dust. The force field they had raised to protect themselves flickered, weakening, its blue sparks nearly fading. Every second was a fight for survival, not just against their enemies, but against time and nature itself. Ethan knew that if the barrier fell, they'd be exposed, and likely dead. Amid the chaos, he sensed movement behind them. Turning his head, he saw a figure emerging from the storm. The commander of the Children of Perdition, a woman with silver skin and a hard, unreadable gaze. Her presence seemed to absorb all light, making her even more menacing. "Zaria, end this now," she ordered, voice cold and commanding. But despite the pain and fatigue, Zaria slowly stood, looking the commander straight in the eyes. "This is our world now," she declared, voice firm, full of defiance and hope. Then, with a decisive motion, she unleashed the energy stored in the crystal around her neck in a massive, radiant wave, a burst of blue light that swept across the battlefield. The enemy machines disintegrated instantly, evaporating into sparks and smoke, while the sandstorm began to clear. When the dust settled, Ethan and Zaria stood exhausted and wounded, but victorious. The scars of the fight would run deep, not just on their bodies, but in their souls. Yet the bond between them was stronger than ever, inviolable, forged in the fire of adversity. They looked at each other as the storm ended outside, giving way to a silent, calm, starry sky. They knew this victory was only the beginning of a new chapter, filled with challenges, but also hope. The desert horizon dawned soft shades of orange and pink, as if the very earth was breathing a silent sigh of relief. The sandstorm had finally passed, leaving behind fresh, clean air that contrasted sharply with the chaos of recent days. The dunes, now bathed in the morning sun, looked peaceful, a golden tapestry stretching as far as the eye could see. Inside the makeshift workshop, Ethan Carter sat on a rustic wooden bench, his bandaged leg resting on a stack of crates. The pain from his wound had lessened, but the ache still reminded him of what they had faced. Yet his eyes shone with a different light, a mix of relief, fatigue, and hope. Beside him, Zaria gazed at the morning sky, her blue skin glowing softly in the first sunlight. The horns adorning her head cast delicate shadows on the metal walls of the workshop. She breathed deeply, savoring the desert air filling her lungs, a simple luxury in the midst of the storm that life had become. "Looks like the desert finally decided to give us a break." Ethan broke the silence. "A break we need to make the most of," Zaria replied, still watching the horizon. They both knew this moment of calm was rare and precious. The attack by the children of perdition had left deep marks, not just on their surroundings, but on their souls. The physical scars were obvious: scratches, bruises, Ethan's wounded leg, and Zaria's cut shoulder. But it was the invisible wounds, the ones lodged deep in the heart and mind, where the real challenge began. Ethan turned to her, a tired but genuine smile forming on his lips. "Do you think this will ever end?" he asked, mixing curiosity with apprehension. Zaria sighed, her deep violet eyes heavy with an ancient melancholy. "I don't know if this fight will ever have an end," she answered honestly. "But I do know that as long as we're together, we can find the strength to keep going. That alone is a victory." She reached out, gently touching the crystal hanging from her neck, the same crystal that had been the source of her power and their connection. "This bond between us," she continued, "is more than just physical protection. It's a bond of hope, a promise that we're not alone." Ethan held her hand, feeling the crystal's pulsing energy blend with the warmth he offered. It was a fragile moment, a bridge between two worlds, a living proof that even amidst chaos, humanity could bloom. As the sun rose, lighting every corner of the workshop and the desert beyond, they began to plan. The 227B ship was still damaged, needing urgent repairs if they wanted to leave this place, a temporary sanctuary that could quickly turn into a trap. Marcus, the government messenger, had promised help, but aid wouldn't come as soon as they needed. So they'd have to manage on their own, gather supplies and seek allies in the small, isolated communities nearby. "We need to prepare for the next attack," Ethan said, looking up at the clear sky. "But we also have to believe we can change our fate." Zaria nodded, her face lit with renewed determination. "And we'll do it together." In the days that followed, life in the workshop was marked by hard work, long conversations, and quiet moments of reflection. Ethan and Zaria shared the tasks, taking care of each other and strengthening the bond that already tied them inseparably. With every repair to the ship, every adjustment to their defenses, They felt like they were rebuilding not just technology, but the very hope for a different future. At night, sitting around a small campfire, they shared stories and dreams, discovering that despite their different origins, their hopes were surprisingly alike. "I never thought I'd find someone like you here," Ethan confessed one night, looking up at the stars shining overhead. Zaria smiled, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "And I never thought I'd meet a human who could understand my pain and purpose." The desert, once an unforgiving enemy, was now a silent witness to the bond growing between them. A bond forged in struggle, loss, but also courage and a love beginning to bloom. They knew the road ahead would be full of challenges, hard choices, and sacrifices. But there, in that rare moment of peace, they found the strength to keep going. Because despite the uncertainties, they were together. And for them, that was enough. The desert stretched out like a golden sea, each grain of sand seeming to carry a forgotten story, a silent secret that time dared not reveal. Under the scorching midday sun, Ethan and Zaria sat in the fragile shade of a lone tree, a rare gift in that harsh world. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was thick with the weight of all they'd lived through, battles fought, and a love that, against all odds, had blossomed in that unforgiving landscape. Ethan stared out at the horizon, feeling the weight of everything that had happened. The cheap ship he'd bought at auction, the unsettling surprise of a foreign wife delivered along with it, the cultural and biological differences, the conflict and the union. His mind replayed every moment, every choice, every risk taken by that blue-skinned, black-haired woman who was now an inseparable part of his life. He broke the silence, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought something like this was possible. A love that challenges not just what we know, but what we believe to be real." Zaria turned to him, her violet eyes reflecting the warm sunlight like two beacons lighting up his soul. "Our love isn't just a story of survival," she replied calmly. "It's living proof that even amidst chaos and destruction, hope can bloom. That differences aren't barriers, they're bridges." She ran her hand over the crystal hanging around her neck, the same source of power and connection that had bound them, now a symbol of their bond strength. "I come from a place where everything was lost, where darkness nearly consumed my people. But here, by your side, I found a new light, a purpose." Ethan held her hand, feeling the human warmth mixed with the subtle energy from the crystal. "We both carry scars," he said softly. "Not all are visible, but they shape who we are. And they make us stronger," Zaria added, squeezing his fingers firmly. They stood there a while longer, soaking in the moment, allowing themselves to feel the depth of a connection that transcended the physical, the cultural, and even time itself. It was rare, almost magical, yet deeply real. The desert around them seemed to witness their intimacy. The twisted trees, the hot stones, the endless sky. Everything conspired to let this love exist, despite all odds. Ethan thought back to the hard days, the fearful nights, the risks, and how each one had been a piece in the mosaic forming their bond. They'd faced powerful enemies, merciless storms, and, above all, doubt itself. "Do you think people could understand what we have?" he asked, his voice tinged with vulnerability. Zaria smiled softly, her eyes shining with calm determination. "What we have is unique, Ethan. Maybe the world isn't ready to understand, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that we're true to each other." She stood, reaching out her hand to him. "Let's keep going. There's still so much to do." Ethan took her hand, feeling certain that together they could face whatever came their way. They rose and began walking across the desert, each step a silent promise of resistance and love. As they walked, Ethan felt the strength of a feeling that went beyond survival. It was a deep commitment to care, protect, and build an uncertain but hopeful future. "You know," he said, "all of this has changed who I am. I'm not the man who bought that cheap ship anymore. I'm someone who believes, who fights, and who loves." Zaria looked at him tenderly and replied, "And I, who thought I'd be alone forever, found not just a companion, but a home." They walked in silence, letting the desert speak for them, their footsteps marking the hot sand, leaving trails the wind slowly began to erase. Deep down, They knew their individual stories didn't have predictable endings. The future was wide open, full of challenges, uncertainties, and battles. But now, they carried something unbreakable, the love that had grown in the middle of the desert, as resilient as the sands themselves, as eternal as the starry sky that covered them on the coldest nights. What began as an unexpected purchase, an unlikely auction, had become an epic tale of courage, overcoming, and connection. Ethan looked at Zaria and smiled, a mix of gratitude and admiration lighting up his face. "Thank you for coming to me," he said. "I'm grateful you accepted me," she replied, stepping closer into an embrace that sealed not just a pact, but a shared destiny. In that moment, beneath the desert sun, now shining at full strength, they knew the love that bound them was their greatest weapon against the darkness threatening their world. It was the flame that kept hope alive, the promise that even in the face of the impossible, humanity and alienness could coexist and thrive. The desert sun was high now, casting a golden light on every grain of sand, as if celebrating this new chapter in Ethan and Zaria's journey. A warm breeze blew gently, carrying the dry scent of hardy plants that somehow bloomed in this harsh landscape. The desert, once a symbol of challenge and solitude, was now a silent witness to a fresh start. The old ship, 227B, rested quietly in its makeshift shelter. Despite the visible scars of the recent battle, dented panels, cracks in the hull, scorch marks, it was ready to fly again, a tangible symbol of the resilience shared by the two companions who called it home. Ethan looked over the ship with a mix of pride and nostalgia. This vessel wasn't just transportation. It was the link that held them together, the home that housed their dreams, the promise of freedom. He turned to Zaria, who was carefully adjusting the navigation instruments, her blue skin glowing softly in the sunlight. "We're ready for the next step," Ethan said, his voice steady. "What's next?" Zaria smiled, her piercing gaze reflecting unwavering determination. "Whatever comes, we face it together. Our love, our alliance, is the foundation for everything we want to build." They knew the future was a blank canvas, an unknown filled with possibilities and challenges. The victory over the children of perdition was only the beginning of a greater fight for freedom, acceptance, and a world where humans and aliens could live in peace. As they prepared the ship for takeoff, small figures began to gather around the shelter. Men, women, and children from nearby communities drawn by the hope Ethan and Zaria represented. Some brought supplies. Others offered words of encouragement and friendship. "You're proof that we can win," said an elderly woman, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for not giving up." The couple exchanged looks filled with emotion. They were no longer alone. Their fight inspired others to join, to resist, to believe in something bigger. With the engine of the ship roaring to life, Ethan gripped Zaria's hand tightly, feeling the warmth and strength of that touch. "Ready to fly?" he asked with a playful smile. "Ready," she replied, squeezing his hand. The 227B rose into the desert sky, cutting through the air in a climb that seemed to defy not only gravity, but the barriers that had separated them for so long. As the ship disappeared on the horizon, Ethan looked back one last time at the desert that had witnessed their birth and growth as a couple. He knew that place, with all its harshness and beauty, would forever be a part of them, a symbol of the impossible love they'd conquered. "No matter where we go," he said, looking at Zaria, "home is wherever we're together." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. And that's what truly matters. The future lay open, unknown and full of promise. But with hearts full of hope and hands intertwined, Ethan and Zaria were ready to face it together. If you've ever rooted for an impossible love, leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe for more moving stories like this.